And then now, I mean, she focuses so much on composition, and her music is fantastic. The piece we did before of hers was called Starburst, if you remember. It was also for string orchestra, like the piece we're doing tomorrow night, which is entitled Strum. Strum was originally written back in 2006 as a piece for string quartet with an extra cello. So it was sort of like a string quintet. And then it went through a couple of different manifestations because it was such a popular piece in that when it was first performed. So she later created, among other versions, a string orchestra version. That's what we'll be performing tomorrow night. But it still starts with the intimacy of a string quintet because it starts with just one solo viola playing pizzicato and strumming on their instrument. And then one solo violin comes in and strums on their instrument. And when I say strum, I'm talking about playing it almost like a guitar. Drum, 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 drum. So in a way, the kind of big question and sort of conceit, if you will, of this piece is, can orchestral string players strum like a guitar? And the answer is yes. Yeah, that's in a way what Jesse Montgomery is trying to put forth here. And in fact, the strumming, pizzicato strumming of the instruments throughout all the string sections over the course of the piece is in a way the underpinning, that thing that ties the whole piece together. Different sections will have their turn strumming and playing pizzicato on their instruments, and it creates a textural motif in a way. That's the way she referred to it. She said, in a way, instead of like a melodic motif that ties the whole piece together, we have this texture of strumming that ties the whole piece together. And you'll hear it in different kind of styles and different ways, but there's that pizzicato that runs through the whole piece. There's something also lovely about the way it starts because it feels almost like the solo viola pizzing and then the violin, and then when the cello comes in playing a melody arco. Arco is the opposite of pizzicato, is when they play with the bow. It feels as though they're making it up on the spot. And so there's this lovely quality of a sort of improvisatory jam session that you're hearing. Here's a little bit of what it sounds like. It starts quietly, so you'll have to listen, kind of see if we can get this loud enough in the speakers. My volume's all the way up, so I think I'm just going to restart and play it into the mic. 1 second. Here we go. 1 second. Can you hear that?
Oh. Slightly.
You can kind of hear a little bit of that strumming, though, maybe. It has this kind of like quiet atmosphere at first, but the piece is really intense. After a short introduction like that, it's off to the races, and it's just, it's extremely challenging also for the strings. I'm so impressed with our Cheyenne Symphony string section. Let me play you a little bit about when it gets faster and it really starts to get going. Can you hear that? That's just an example of it. Any fans of the show Downton Abbey here? Yes, many. Okay. I'm a little hesitant to even mention this, but I looked up the date of when Downton Abbey started because as I was studying this, I was like, that melody is used in the Downton Abbey soundtrack quite a bit. There are parts of this that really sound Downton Abbey-ish. Let me see if I can find the part. Yeah. So this came before Downton Abbey. Isn't that interesting? Yes. Maybe somebody who made that soundtrack heard this. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that. But it's an exciting, thrilling piece that puts the orchestra strings through the paces and shows everything they're capable of in terms of like from whispering to shouting, dancing, and celebrating. The piece has it all. It's about 8 minutes. It's going to be our concert opener tomorrow night. So that's exciting. And I'm going to go slightly out of concert order because the next thing after Strum will be the clarinet concerto. But you know I like to save the guest artist till later, right? So I'm going to jump ahead to the first piece after intermission, which is a piece called Princesa de la Luna by Quinn Mason. He is even younger than Jesse Montgomery. I think maybe he's 30. But he's already having music performed by orchestras all over the country, even internationally. He is also a conductor. I think we heard he just came back from conducting in Europe. And so it's interesting how Jessie Montgomery, in her piece, she focuses on strings. She was a violinist herself. Much of her music focuses on strings, although she's written fantastic pieces for full orchestra. With Quinn Mason, it's a little different. He first started composing when he was 10 years old, and he went to see the Dallas Symphony. He grew up in Dallas, and he heard a performance live of Peter and the Wolf, and he fell in love with the whole sound of the orchestra. And so he loves the sound of the orchestra and exploring the colors and textures you can make with that sonority. Now, does he use the full orchestra in the piece we're playing tomorrow night? Actually not. He uses strings and harp, and he uses the harp as a very beautiful featured instrument throughout the piece, with beautiful harp glissandos and a sort of harp whispering effect called bisbigliando, which is just Italian for whispering, and harp harmonics and things like that. So you'll get to see a lot of cool harp in this piece. The title, Princesa de la Luna, refers to this imaginary fairy. He sort of not only wrote this piece, but he created a whole myth or fairy tale to go along with it. He said he imagined a fictional princess who lived in the sky and only came out on the night of a full moon. So this is a nocturne piece. We have a wonderful history of orchestral nocturnes going back to, many different pieces like Debussy and of course in non-orchestral terms, of course, there's the Chopin nocturnes and many others, John Field. But this is a piece that is at rest. There's not a lot of activity. So right away, it's extremely different than most of the strum piece that Jessie Montgomery wrote, which is high energy, high action. This is a piece that, like I said, is also about texture, but not the pizzicato texture. This is about almost like creating this beautiful sonority of just strings and harp and exploring what that would sound like. There's not a clear story through the piece. He's just trying to describe this imaginary princess in the sky, but he wants the audiences to sort of hear the princess in the music. And he says there's some times where the music gets a little bit more intense, or a little bit, and maybe that's the princess's vanity coming through, or something like that. So, it's a lovely piece, extremely original piece. I can play you a little bit, but it's also kind of quiet. So we'll have to listen really carefully to this. Or I could jump ahead to maybe where it gets a little bit more. It gets a little louder, perhaps. Can you hear that at all? I am going to just jump ahead so I get to a place where there are some parts where it actually gets quite loud. And I think those are the moments where he's talking about the princess's vanity coming through. It's a beautiful, sort of almost like an impressionistic type of piece in the style of Debussy or Ravel. That it has that feeling of impressionism to it. But you know how we all love it when a harp does a glissando and goes or up or down? The piece uses that in a really special way. He doesn't overdo it, but he makes it like one of the featured main things that happens in this piece. And when it happens quite a bit. But he never really overdoes it. One interesting thing, one effect is when our harpist is asked to play downward, and like goes like, and it ends with cellos and basses playing the bottom for her. And it has this beautiful sort of like mega harp effect. So listen for that. Listen for how there's a melody, but it's moving very slowly. It's usually just in the first violins, and even just the divided, like half of the first violins sometimes. And so sometimes it's actually a little hard to hear that melody because the texture underneath it is equally important. and the texture moves in different ways, and the piece starts slow, and it gets slower, and a little bit slower, and a little bit slower. It's like maybe we're going deeper into a sleep, or deeper at night, in the darkness of the night. So, even with the full moon. So that's the story of Princesa de la Luna. We're thrilled that the composer made us a wonderful little video specifically for Cheyenne and specifically for the students who listened to this piece yesterday. We had our education concerts that we do once a year for 3,000 fifth and sixth graders. That happened yesterday, and they heard parts of each of the 4 pieces on this program. And it's neat that he made a special video for us, which people will see on the live stream during the intermission. And he'll be watching the live stream himself personally tomorrow night, so he'll be there with us in spirit. So that's a little bit about Quinn Mason. We're excited that it's our first piece of his that we're ever playing, and hopefully not our last, so we're excited to see what else he's going to be writing. So contrasting these 2 fresh American voices, we have maybe the dean, if you will, of American composers, Aaron Copland, maybe one of our greatest composers, arguably. And you know, Copland himself lived quite a long life, from 1900 to 1990. So interesting. And all the different kinds of historical events that he lived through. What's interesting is that many of us, that when we think of Copland's music, we think of the pieces that are so beloved, like Appalachian Spring, Billy the Kid, Rodeo, The Hoedown, Fanfare for the Common Man, some of his film scores like The Red Pony, Of Mice and Men, Our Town. All of these pieces that I just mentioned were all written within a maybe 10 or 15 year period during that 90-year lifetime. During the other times of his life, he wrote very different types of music. When he was a younger man, before he wrote Billy the Kid and Appalachian Spring and things like that, he was writing in a more modernist style. He was trying to maybe follow the lead of Gershwin and combine jazz and symphonic music, but not in as popular of a way as Gershwin. Some of his music from the 1920s and before the Great Depression was music that was very avant-garde. He was like a young rebel, right? He studied in Paris, in France, not exactly in Paris, but he studied in Fontainebleau with Madame Boulanger, Nadia Boulanger, the great composition professor, who very importantly said that Copland was her best student ever. She had many of the greatest composers of the 20th century were her student. I thought that was an interesting thing. Isn't that cool? Yeah. So anyway, he studied with her. He came back. He wanted to make his mark. He had this very complex piece for organ and orchestra and piano and orchestra, and he was making his mark. Then the Great Depression hit, and he thought maybe his music could be used to help lift people's spirits. And so he started writing in his more populist style, and that's when these great ballets, Appalachian Spring, Rodeo, and Billy the Kid, and many of these other pieces that are in a more popular kind of style, that's when they came about. He completely changed his compositional kind of approach. Instead of being avant-garde and modern, he made everything very sparse, and in a way, he kind of helped us figure out an American sound in classical music by doing so. So it's interesting to note that these pieces, Appalachian Spring came from 1944, so it wasn't just in that period of the Great Depression, it was at the height of World War II. Another interesting thing is that during World War II, although he wrote Fanfare for the Common Man as a way to help people get through the difficulties of war, to inspire people, he wrote Fanfare for the Common Man for the troops and for us, others who were back at home. Other than that, nothing he wrote was political at all during that time, during the whole time of World War II. He was focused on pieces like the Clarinet Concerto or Appalachian Spring from 1944. So those 2 pieces you'll get to hear on the program. So the Clarinet Concerto will finish the first half, and Appalachian Spring, the suite from the ballet, will finish the second half. And so why don't we talk a little bit about the Clarinet Concerto, because it is a special piece even among clarinet concertos, isn't it? Yeah. So it was written for a particular clarinetist on commission. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, Kelly?
Absolutely. So it was written for Benny Goodman, who is
Still
perhaps the most famous clarinetist ever.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, we clarinet players are indebted to him for a number of commissions renditions of some of our best repertoire, and including by Poulenc and Bartok and others.
Intimate, yeah.
And,
Yeah, so legitimate, serious classical composers were approached by the king of swing himself, this jazz legend Benny Goodman, to write him like a serious clarinet piece. So I mean, he had the chops and the interest and the musical veracity and audaciousness to do this. It's really cool. So he approached Copland, not the other way around. Yeah.
Perhaps a funny little anecdote about this piece. The original version that Copland wrote was actually much more difficult, and it had some of the high notes in particular. And Benny Goodman apparently told Copland, "I don't know how to play these notes." and Copland said, "Well, I heard you play them on your recordings." And Goodman said, "Oh, I was just making up notes. I don't actually know what they were."
Yeah, when you're playing in jazz, sometimes you're improvising and you're squeaking on purpose, or you're doing a high smear glissando. And so Copland heard some of that and thought, "Oh, all of this is within his free game."
Exactly.
It wasn't. So in fact, the piece was finished in 1948, but the world premiere with Benny Goodman didn't happen until 1950 because it kept getting put off because Goodman was like scared of the piece and couldn't handle some of the notes. Didn't know that actually in the second movement that Copland actually wanted him to swing part of it, and actually it was kind of written for him in mind. Yeah.
Another anecdote that I like to tell sometimes is Copland had just been in Brazil, actually, around this time. And so you can detect hints of Brazilian music, actually, at times, especially a lot of the rhythms that he throws in there. He started, gathering his ideas for this piece while he was down in Brazil.
Yeah. And that's a interesting also, just to, in the broader context of Copland's music, we think of Copland as helping to create this truly American sound, things like Fanfare for the Common Man, Appalachian Spring, Lincoln Portrait, and other things like that. But he also wrote a lot of music inspired by Latin American music. There's El Salón Mexico, Danzón Cubano, the 3 Latin American sketches, many pieces. And he spent a lot of time down in Central and South America. And so this is a piece that he even said in the program note, this definitely was influenced by me writing it in Brazil. So yeah, he even said there's a little hints of boogie woogie and little hints of Charleston in there. It's funny, but definitely the Brazilian and sometimes almost Mexican feeling rhythms at times in this sort of really wild second movement. And by the way, it's a complete contrast to the first movement. So you want to tell them what the first movement is like?
Yeah, the first time I ever heard this piece, it starts out so sweetly and softly and gently, but I had no idea what was coming in the rest of the piece. But it just kind of draws you in on this beautiful lyrical journey, quite long first half of the piece, just sweeping melodies and beautiful large leaps in the clarinets and in the string parts. It's just very, very moving emotionally.
It is. And Copland himself said that it was unusual even for him when he wrote this. He didn't say that he was influenced by the composer Erik Satie, but many people have said it has a sort of feeling like Erik Satie's very famous piece Gymnopédie for piano. Do you know that one?
Yes.
To remind you, I could quickly search and play just a little bit of the opening. This will just take me a few seconds, but it has a kind of quality kind of like that. Here it is. Play. Remember this one?
Oh, yeah.
So Copland never said that that was an influence on it, but many people have said, oh, there's something about it. The clarinet concerto, the way it starts, it's sort of similar. Yeah.
The beginning is very similar.
It is, yeah. It is. And he uses the sound of a low harp. It has interesting scoring because, he could have written it for a full orchestra, but just made sure that the solo clarinet was always clearly heard. But no, he chose just strings, piano and harp. And the piano he saves for the big second movement after the cadenza that's in the middle. So the first one is just strings and harp. Of course, the harp is part of the string family, so when I say strings, but mostly when we say strings, we don't often just assume that harp is involved in it. But yeah, so it's interesting that there are no other woodwinds. And writing for Benny Goodman, there's conspicuously no saxophone, trumpet, drum set, or anything like that. You know, he had carte blanche to kind of do what he wanted for Benny Goodman, and he wanted, I think, to show this other side that Benny Goodman was capable of. And in doing so, he wrote a piece that sort of shows all the different sides that are inside of all of us. We can relate to the first movement, but we can also relate to the wild and sometimes, you know, intense and sometimes jazzy second movement too, right? Tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get started as a musician, and why did you pick the clarinet?
Well, I'm from Colorado, and I grew up in a mostly non-musical family. My brother played the saxophone, and he had a best friend who played the clarinet, and his name was Mike Martin, and I thought he was such a cool guy. And so when it came time to choose an instrument in 5th grade, I chose the clarinet. And funny thing, I never actually heard Mike play the clarinet, I just knew he played it. So I didn't even really know what this instrument was that I was picking. And like most beginners, I was terrible at it. And I actually begged my parents after about a year to let me quit because I was so bad at it.
Wow.
And my dad said, no, let's get you a private teacher. We gotta actually give this a real shot before you quit.
That's good.
So I started taking lessons, and after about a year of instruction with a really good private teacher, I started realizing how fun it could be, and I started getting more and more into music in general, and I realized I just absolutely love music. And so I started practicing a lot more. And I remember the day I was 14, 8th grade, I remember where I was when the thought occurred to me, I could do this for a living. And, you know, everyone told me how hard it would be, and they were right, but I really stuck with it. And you know, thank God it's working out, and I'm doing fine. And it's really happy to be able to play music for a living. It's a wonderful thing.
It is. And you have a multifaceted career in music too. You're not just an orchestral clarinetist. Tell us a little bit more about what other things you do.
Well, I do a lot of teaching. I have about 25 of my own students, and I love teaching, love working with children, and helping them, you know, transform at least a small part of their lives. And I also write music. You know, it's hard to find time to be a composer, but I keep it up, you know, as I can, and I love writing music. I think this is a very exciting time to be someone who composes music because in the 70s and 80s and 90s even, there was much more of a push for composers to be very academic, and there was this sort of, almost you could call it randomization of composition technique in the second half of the 20th century, which led to, you know, a lot of the very avant-garde modern type music that we've all heard. And somehow over the past 20 years or so, everything's sort of freed up, and it feels like composers are freed and welcome to write whatever they want, and a lot of them are really going for beauty, and that's what I would like to do too, and that's what I really appreciate. Because I don't think we've exhausted the capacity for beauty and innovation in classical music.
And in tonality,
Exactly.
as opposed to
Yes.
atonality.
Exactly.
I remember in my days as an undergraduate at Princeton, it was like you were pawns in this political dichotomy in the music department. Were you with the 12-tone atonal people, or were you not? And if you weren't taken seriously. And a lot of these people who were writing that style of music, they were wonderful musicians, but they also had a very intellectual approach. And unfortunately, their music just didn't gain a great audience. But they were kind of controlling the composition teaching in this country in many of the greatest schools for so long. And then that generation has passed. And even like one of my dearest professors was part of that generation. I wouldn't be a composer or a conductor now if it weren't for this one professor at Princeton who was part of that school. He was a composer. But you know, you're right, it's now composers today have a whole different sense of freedom, like you said. They can incorporate any style and you know, anything from history or just making something new. So that's wonderful.
Exactly.
Yeah. So are there some examples of like maybe even just some titles of some pieces that you've written that you want to share?
One of the recent ones I finished writing, and I'm hoping to get it performed soon on my own concert series this coming summer, it's just a solo piano piece called Adagietto. And you could say it's loosely inspired by Chopin and Brahms and Liszt.
Wonderful.
And actually, I'm hoping to have Adam Zukovich play it.
Oh, great.
If he's interested. So.
Oh, wonderful. You might remember Adam played a concerto with us a few seasons ago, the Beethoven Second Piano Concerto. He's actually scheduled to do the Chopin First Piano Concerto with us next season, so that's exciting. He's a professor at UNC. Tell us about that summer music series, because some of these folks might want to come. It has a special location, right? Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do this concert series every summer with my now fiance, who's also in the Sharon Symphony, by the way. She's the principal oboist. Her name's Brittany Bonner. And we host a chamber music series down in the Boulder and Longmont area in Colorado. And we usually do about 7 to 10 concerts per summer. And half of them are outside at McIntosh Lake. We set up a tent and sound reinforcement and everything, and people come and bring picnics and, you know, lawn chairs and even their dogs sometimes. And
It's a beautiful setting, right?
yeah, that's one of my favorite things about it, just the setting, watching the sunset over the lake while you're listening to beautiful music. And we have another series at a historic Swedish church called the Risby Church, which was built in the 1880s. And it's an absolutely picturesque spot with great acoustics.
I bet it's all wood and everything, yeah.
Yeah, it's all wood, and we do candlelight concerts there.
So yeah, you might want to. It might be worth the drive. You might want to go down and check out Kellen and Brittany and everybody else.
Yeah, the name of the organization, we call it Melodic Light. So if you Google that, you'll find us.
That's so great. And then you've also been very active in commissioning new works for the clarinet or clarinet piano. Tell us about that project and the CD that came out.
Yeah, absolutely. Back in probably 2015 and 16, I started working on a CD project. I wanted to commission new music for clarinet and piano by composers who were either from Colorado or lived in Colorado for a substantial part of their lives. And so, yeah, I did end up commissioning several pieces. I found 2 that actually hadn't been recorded yet, but which fit the theme and sort of the overall character of the CD project perfectly. So I commissioned, a composer who just recently retired from the Colorado Symphony, David Mulliken. He's a fantastic composer. Brittany and I have actually also commissioned a trio from him for clarinet, oboe, and piano. And I have some colleagues who I went to college with or met through other avenues. One of the former announcers on the Colorado Public Radio classical station has a daughter who's a composer, and so she wrote something for the project.
Oh, how cool.
Yes. So the album's called Scenes from Home, and has a picture of the Rocky Mountains on the front of it. I think it turned out really nice. It's on Spotify if you want to check it out.
Yeah, that's great. I'm sure many of them will. So tell us a little about your instrument, and then we're going to have you play a little bit. So, so some of us played clarinet when we were young. How does your clarinet or your clarinets, how do they differ from a student model?
Well, In the essentials, they don't differ drastically, but they are probably much more expensive. Made of beautiful grenadilla blackwood, which is one of the most dense kinds of wood, so that's why they tend to use that for building clarinets and oboes.
Isn't that also from South America, if I'm remembering right? The wood, the source of that wood?
It does grow there, yeah. Some people call it African blackwood because it grows in Africa as well.
That's right.
So yeah, these clarinets are made by the Buffet Crampon Company in Paris, and I've actually been there. I went there a couple summers ago to select a bass clarinet, and that was really fun.
Nice. May we ask how many clarinets you have? I mean, just as a curious, not for you personally, but like as a professional clarinet player, how many clarinets do you need to have? Kind of. Like, always one more. She said, yes. No, but I mean, like, people are sometimes surprised that our tuba players have to have like 5 tubas, and our trumpet players have to have like 4 different trumpets. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I would say the bare minimum that you would have to have would be these two. I have a B flat clarinet here, and this other one's an A clarinet. They're in slightly different keys, and they have just slightly different timbres, and I can demonstrate that for you in a minute. But if you want to have a chance of, getting more work and more opportunities, it's really good to also play at least the bass clarinet or the E flat clarinet, which is the little one, like about that big, and that's the more high pitched and louder one. I would say. Yes. And so I have both of those as well. I also have what's called a basset clarinet. It looks like one of these clarinets, but it's probably about 8 inches taller, so it has extra low notes. And I didn't bring it today because it's getting a tune-up, but that's the kind of instrument that Mozart composed for, including his clarinet concerto. And it's really fun to be able to play it all the way down to those bottom notes.
I remember when you first got it, you sent me, I think, a text or an email with pictures, and you were so excited. I got a basset clarinet! When are we doing the Mozart concerto? That's awesome, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very fun instrument.
Yeah, it's so cool. Well, we'd love to hear you play. It's also cool that you're willing to demonstrate the difference between the B flat and the A. Some of us have been at concerts and we see the clarinets swapping them out mid-piece or between pieces. Yeah. And I'm sure they've wondered why that is. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So maybe I'll just talk a little bit about that and then I can play. Back when they were inventing the clarinet, they made clarinets in almost every key imaginable. And I think over time, they decided that the B flat clarinet and the A clarinet sounded the best, in terms of at least the soprano clarinets. So they sort of consolidated down to those two. There had already been lots of music written for both of them, so they decided we better keep both of these instruments. And there was also the C clarinet, which is just in concert pitch, like the piano or a violin or the flute. And that's the one that almost no one has, but you do come across music composed for it.
Strauss.
And so when that happens, we just have to transpose it. Yeah. So that's a skill we have to learn, is how to play different notes than the ones we see on the page.
Yeah, that's a big skill. But yeah, and also because the music that we play in orchestras normally is tonal and it has different kinds of keys and key signatures, you've heard about this. Even without musical training, you've heard of C major and A major and things like that, right? Well, some of them have flats, the little B, and some of them have sharps, the little hashtag, right? Boy, this is getting cool and basic. I like how basic this is. So the cool thing about there being primarily a B flat and A clarinet is that the B flat is sort of easier to play in flats, and the A is easier to play in sharps because they have that natural tuning to them. But you can play in any key on both of them. But it does make it easier. If the orchestra's playing in a key with like 6 sharps, to have to play that on the B flat clarinet would be extremely hard. Yeah.
So I'd be happy to demonstrate if you can give me a
When were
moment.
they invented?
Oh, that's a good question. It goes way back.
Yeah. It's hard to nail down a specific date because there are many different iterations and versions of it. going all the way back to primitive instruments like the shawm, one of the first reed instruments. But there was an instrument called the shalliamo back in the Renaissance and Baroque eras. That was basically a clarinet with only one octave and no keys really.
Yeah, very fewer notes, almost more recorder-like, but with the reed.
Exactly.
Yeah. So but it's a good question because clarinets didn't join the orchestra until around the time of Haydn and Mozart. If I remember right.
Yeah, they were the first major composers to use the clarinet in the orchestra.
So like in Bach's time with Johann Sebastian Bach, we have wonderful things like the orchestral suite with flute and strings. And there were recorders, but also there were flutes played this way. Back in that time, there were also oboes and what they called oboe da caccia, which was like the oboe of the hunt, which later became the English horn. And there were some other woodwinds too. The bassoon, notably, was developed pretty early on, a very primitive version, early in the version of the bassoon. But the clarinet didn't join the orchestra party until a little later. And there's like nothing, correct me if I'm wrong, but is there nothing by Johann Sebastian Bach for the clarinet?
As far as I know, there's
Yeah.
not.
So like, and I mean, he was a very prolific composer. So if there were clarinet was available to him, he would have written for it. But I can't think of a single thing by Bach for clarinet. None of his big, passions or oratorios, nothing. So it wasn't until that next generation when the instrument itself got developed enough and maybe they added more keys and they figured out the technology to add more notes that then composers said, yeah, let's put it in the orchestra type of thing. Yeah. Thank you. So which one is this, the B flat, right?
So yeah, this is the B flat clarinet. Maybe I'll just play like a scale on both of them so you can hear the difference.
It's a subtle difference. It's very subtle.
It's very subtle.
Maybe you could hear it more in the low range. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Maybe so. How I would describe it is this one, the A clarinet. It's a little bit more mellow, not as projecting as the B flat clarinet. The sound is just a little bit more, you could say, not necessarily dampened, but just covered.
Yeah, a little bit
Yeah.
covered. Yeah, you're right. And curiously, Copeland doesn't write for it in this piece in the clarinet concerto at all, right?
Correct. In Appalachian Spring, however, we do have to switch back and forth a lot.
Yeah, but in the clarinet concerto, it's all for the B flat.
Yeah, and that's pretty nice that we don't have to switch.
Well, cool. Do you want to demonstrate some other things? Maybe while you have the A out, would you mind playing? You had mentioned earlier you'd be willing to play a little bit of the Mozart concerto.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So Mozart's clarinet concerto is the most famous clarinet piece probably. So yeah, I'll just play a little of the second movement of that.
So beautiful. I recognize this from the English Patient movie. Or was it Out of Africa? Out of Africa. Sorry, it was Out of Africa. It was used in the soundtrack. Oh, so mezzo or something like that. And boy, beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. Yeah. Do you want me to play any of the
Please.
concerto?
Yeah. Let's hear a little bit.
Okay. In specific spots.
Well, maybe you play a little bit of the opening.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's do it.
So here comes a little bit of the fullness. That creates that almost gymnopédie-like effect with the settee. And it continues on, but then there's a transition, and there's no break in this concerto. There's, connecting the two movements is the cadenza. That's the spot where the soloist plays alone. And back in the day, cadenzas were often improvised. But by the time Copland wrote this, it was getting to be pretty normal for composers to write out the cadenza. So the composers, a little bit control freaks, right? Didn't want to just leave it up to chance of whatever the soloist might do. And I'm sure it was no offense or slight to Benny Goodman at all, but what he does is, what Copland does is he creates this way of transitioning from that mood of the first movement into a much different style and mood of the second movement, and perfectly sets up the second movement. So it's like a great little segue. It's about 2 minutes long though. Do you want to play just like a little bit of the beginning of it and then jump to the end? Or?
Sure, yeah, I can do that. And it is one of the longest clarinet cadenzas in any concerto.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool. Wow.
So I won't play the whole thing, but this is where it starts getting much livelier and even bombastic and quite loud at times. So
yeah, and he really likes exploring the high range too.
Yeah, so I don't know if our microphone can handle all these high notes, but I'd be happy to play a little if you want.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah. super challenging or anything that you want to draw attention to? Or not draw attention to? You all sound amazing on all of it.
That's a great question.
There's some cute
there's
little-
one section.
Yeah, sure. I was going to say there are some interesting indications by Copeland in the score for the clarinetist, like suave and things like that. And it's like with humor, things like that. Yeah.
So I'll play one of the sections marked with humor.
That section is particularly fun because Copeland asks the bass players in the bass section to slap their basses like he's in a, like you're doing the da-da-dum. It's like this offbeat, backbeat type of thing in the basses, so it really adds, it's a really kind of fun moment, yeah. Kind of sounds so great. I'm really happy to feature you in this piece, and we can't wait to hear you play the Mozart with us eventually, too. Do you guys have any questions for Kellen? Yeah, thank you, bravo.
Yeah.
Some questions for Kellen? Yeah.
How do you train physically to perform like
That's a great question. I've been trying to do as much cardio as I can. And yeah, you know, sometimes when we play, especially as orchestral musicians, we sit down and play. But for a concerto, I try to always practice standing up and just, you know, make sure I have all the stamina. And
It's very different standing up. You know, it's also would be very different if we like brought in a clarinetist from sea level to come in and play this. Thankfully, you're used to our elevation. Yeah, so that's good. Well, thank you again, Kellen. Any other questions?
Talk a bit about the reeds. I see you got 5,000 of them there, so.
oh yeah,
You have a lot of reeds. I see you making little adjustments to the ligature.
exactly. So the reed is my favorite thing about the clarinet.
He's joking.
Since they are little pieces of wood, they are affected greatly by temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, the weather, so many things. And so I basically just have a lot of reeds at all times so that if they are adversely affected, I'll hopefully have enough that I have still plenty of good ones left.
Made out of what?
They're made out of cane. The name is
So like real
Arundodonax.
cane.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a relative of bamboo.
It's a relative. Yeah. Like all the woodland.
Are they expensive?
They're not too bad. A box of 10 is about $40. So.
Made in the USA.
Actually, I don't know of any good reeds made in the USA. They're mostly made in countries with warmer climates,
Oh, yeah.
nice humid climates. So South America, or like
Sure.
a lot of them are from France. And yeah, when you get a new reed, it does take a while of careful breaking in to make sure it can sound good and last long. So I usually have to break them in for about 3 weeks before I would want to play it in front of anyone.
Interesting. I didn't notice that long. It's
Yeah.
interesting. Wow.
Do you ever make your own?
I have made my own, and it was an interesting experience.
I would watch Lindsay make them at times.
Yeah, it's different for oboe. When
Yeah.
every oboist makes them, but most clarinetists buy them and they tweak them and adjust them, but they don't usually
Yeah.
make them. Yeah.
I know, I see my fiance making reeds every day, and I'm grateful I don't have to make them myself. I do work on them and adjust them.
Yeah, that's so cool. Well, thank you, Colin. It's great to get to know more about you. We see you at every concert, so
Thank
we
you.
love having you in the orchestra. Bravo.
Thank you.
We got so carried away that now we have no time to talk But I will give a pre-concert lecture before the show from 6:30 to 7. 6:30 to 7. So I'll definitely talk about it then. But just real quick, this is a piece that when it was first performed, it was a kind of a dream team between Copeland and the star choreographer Martha Graham, whose modern dance style would seem to be very in contrast to some of the music that Copeland was writing in this Americana kind of style, not as complex. But somehow he manages to fuse it all together. It's interesting that when he wrote it originally, he did not have the whole story of the ballet in mind. He just made music that he called Ballet for Martha. And it was Martha Graham who heard it and then was inspired to create an actual story behind it. She found a line in a Hart Crane poem that said Appalachian Spring, referring to a spring of water. But she created a story about a young couple in springtime. So she actually meant the title to refer to the season. And it was supposed to be in the early 1800s, a pioneer couple, a husband and wife who just got married. And their preacher friends and the preacher's followers, and an old woman who had like the rocky, advice of experience and things like that. And it's a beautiful ballet. It's a very interesting ballet with sets, very modernist, sparse sets by Isami Noguchi. And so it had this dream team of Martha Graham, Noguchi, Copeland, and it won all sorts of awards and became very popular. And because of that, Copeland decided to take the original score, which only was for 13 instruments, and create an orchestral version of it and a suite for concerts. And so mostly today we hear this piece in its concert version with the full orchestra, or sometimes with the original 13 instruments, but not as often with the ballet. The story is still the same. With the music, without the ballet, or the story sort of tells the music tells the story. And it's a beautiful story. And one of the things that's so wonderful about this piece is that Copeland creates his own sort of original folk-sounding music in it. And he uses that sparse kind of open intervals, fourths and fifths and octaves, to create a sense of landscape, a sense of place. So that when we hear the music, we're not just hearing music, we're seeing the countryside, we're seeing those Appalachians, we're hearing the dawn rise over those hills in the very opening. And but again, there are other parts of the music that's very fast and rhythmic and complex from a standpoint, really specifically maybe for Martha Graham and her characteristic style of modern dance. But he has these original sounding folk songs that he wrote, but then the sort of culmination of the piece, in a sense, is when he brings in the old shaker tune, Simple Gifts. And when he wrote this in 1944, not too many people were aware of the song Simple Gifts. It was a shaker tune from the 1840s. And it has to do with living a simple life and having humility and faith in God and appreciating music and dance. It ties in just perfectly with the sentiment of this piece, but also the sentiment that was almost characteristic of Copeland's life himself. Although he was one of the most celebrated composers in the world, he chose to write music in a very modest home by candlelight. And so he really did embody some of those ideals of simple gifts and what we hear with that song. And so that's just a little bit of a teaser, but I'll tell you more about it if you come to the pre-concert lecture.
Yeah.
I want to take a moment to thank you all for coming out and for all the ways that you support the Cheyenne Symphony. I want to thank again our wonderful soloist, Kellen, for being here and being featured with the orchestra. And I want to thank, of course, the Laramie County Library. And Geraldine has a few announcements about maybe some upcoming events here at the library. Welcome, Geraldine.